It was supposed to be a conversation. Two women, no audience, no applause, no distractions to soften the edges, just microphones, sharp questions, and nowhere to hide. But when Meghan Markle sat down across from Megyn Kelly, something subtle yet undeniable shifted in the room. The air felt tighter. The smiles were thinner than they needed to be. Every pause carried weight. Every breath seemed measured. Behind the polite language and carefully chosen words, something fragile was already cracking. And by the end of the interview, one of them would lose control. The other would make sure the cameras never forgot it. The studio was quiet in a way that felt intentional. There was no audience to react, no laughter track to release tension, no warm lighting to blur the edges. It's just a simple table, two chairs, microphones positioned with clinical precision, and red recording lights glowing like silent witnesses. This wasn't a talk show. It was a confrontation disguised as dialogue. Meghan Markle adjusted her posture as she settled into her chair, crossing one leg over the other with practiced elegance. Her movements were smooth, deliberate, the kind that came from years of public scrutiny. Her expression was composed, confident, controlled, almost detached. A faint smile rested on her lips, suggesting she believed she was already above whatever questions might come her way. Across from her, Megyn Kelly glanced down at her notes, then back up again, calm, measured, neutral at least on the surface. She had done this countless times before. She knew how to let silence do the work. She knew how to ask a question without raising her voice and still make it feel unavoidable. Megyn began smoothly, her voice steady and polite. "Thank you for joining me." Megyn nodded once. "Of course," she replied. "Believe conversations like this are important, especially when women are given space to speak freely." The emphasis on freely didn't go unnoticed. Megyn smiled slightly. "That's exactly what we're here for." There was a pause. Just a second longer than necessary. The kind of pause that wasn't accidental. Megyn leaned forward just enough to signal engagement, not aggression. "You've spoken a lot about reclaiming your voice," she continued, "about stepping away from royal life, about autonomy and control. But many people feel your story is selectively told." Megyn's smile tightened. "Just a fraction," she said lightly. "That's an interesting way to frame lived experience." Megyn didn't flinch. "Is it?" she asked calmly. "Or is it a fair question when so many details seem to change depending on the platform?" The air shifted. Megyn tilted her head slightly, her eyes sharpening. "I don't think trauma needs to be narrated the same way every time to be valid." "Of course not," Megyn replied evenly. "But consistency does matter when credibility is involved." Megyn let out a short, breathy laugh. It wasn't amused. It was dismissive. "Credibility according to whom?" she asked. "A tabloid. Editors, commentators who built careers attacking me?" Megyn's tone remained level according to the public. According to people who listen carefully. Megyn leaned back in her chair, folding her arms across her chest. The movement was subtle, but unmistakably defensive. "I find it fascinating," she said, "how a woman speaks about her pain, and suddenly everyone becomes an expert in how she should do it." Megyn nodded slowly. "And I find it fascinating how criticism is often labeled as cruelty when it becomes inconvenient." Silence filled the space between them. Megyn's jaw clenched slightly. She looked away for half a second, just long enough to register, then looked back. "You know," she said, her voice smoother now, more controlled. "This feels less like an interview and more like an interrogation." Megyn met her gaze without hesitation. "Only if honesty feels threatening." That landed. Megyn's smile returned, but it was colder now, sharper. "I came here to talk about my work," she said. "My initiatives, my advocacy." "And we will," Megyn replied. "But context matters. Your work exists inside a very public narrative, one you helped shape." Megyn's fingers tapped lightly against her arm, a quiet rhythm betraying the tension beneath her composure. "I didn't shape the narrative," she said. "I survived it." Megyn tilted her head. "Some would argue you refined it." The words hung there, suspended. Megyn's voice rose just slightly. "This is exactly what I mean. No matter what I say, it's twisted." Megyn didn't raise her voice. She didn't interrupt or questioned. She said, "There's a difference." For the first time, Meghan's control slipped. Just a crack. Her breath hitched before she spoke again. "You don't get to define my truth." "I'm not trying to," Meghan replied. "I'm asking you to explain it." Another pause. Longer this time. Meghan straightened, her composure snapping back into place like armor. "Explained myself countless times," she said. "At some point, people have to decide whether they're listening or just waiting to doubt." Meghan glanced briefly at her notes, then back up. "And at some point," she said, "public figures have to accept that transparency invites scrutiny." The red lights continued to glow. No one laughed. No one clapped. No one stepped in to soften the exchange. This wasn't chaos. It was something quieter. It's more dangerous. Two women sitting across from each other, neither willing to blink first, teach, convinced the other was the one losing control, and the cameras were still rolling. "Are you implying I manipulated my story?" Meghan asked, her voice calm but edged with steel. "I'm asking whether you curated it," Meghan replied. The distinction hung between them, sharp and deliberate. Meghan leaned forward now, mirroring Meghan's posture almost unconsciously. "I don't need to curate pain," she said. "It exists whether you approve of it or not." Meghan didn't blink. "Pain exists," she said evenly. "Accountability does too." The tension was longer subtle, pressed into the room, thick enough to feel. Meghan exhaled sharply, the sound barely restrained. "This is exactly the problem," she said. "Women like me are expected to explain ourselves endlessly, while others get applauded for silence." Meghan raised an eyebrow. "Silence," she said, "or restraint." Meghan's voice sharpened. "That sounds like a judgment." Meghan's reply was immediate. "Only if it applies." Another pause followed, heavier than the ones before. Meghan shifted in her seat, adjusting the sleeve of her jacket, a small movement that betrayed her irritation. "I agreed to this interview," she said carefully, "because I believed you were capable of nuance." "I am," Meghan replied. "That's why I'm asking questions instead of offering sympathy." Meghan's eyes flashed. "Sympathy isn't what I need," Meghan said softly. "Control is." That was the moment. Not the explosion yet, but the crack beneath the surface. Meghan stared at her, stunned for a brief beat. Then the smile returned, slow and deliberate, carefully reconstructed. "Well," she said, her voice silky but sharp, "this is already far more revealing than I expected." Meghan glanced briefly toward the camera, then back. "So are you," she said, and somewhere between those words, it became clear this conversation was no longer about stories. It was about power. Neither woman was willing to give it up. The room felt smaller now, not physically, but emotionally, as if the walls had inched closer the moment. Meghan realized this wasn't going to be a sympathetic conversation. Meghan uncrossed her arms and leaned forward again, this time with intent. "You keep framing this as control," she said. "But isn't it interesting how women are only accused of wanting control when they refuse to be silent?" Meghan nodded once. "That's true in many cases," she said, then paused. "What? Not all." Meghan's eyes narrowed. "So which category am I in?" Meghan didn't hesitate. "The one where silence was replaced by saturation." Meghan let out a dry laugh. "That's clever," she said, "but also deeply unfair." "Is it?" Meghan asked calmly. "You've spoken on podcasts, documentaries, books, interviews. Panels yet? You insist you were silenced." Meghan's tone hardened. "You're confusing access with agency." Meghan glanced down at her notes, then back up. "Then let's talk agency. You walked away from the royal institution?" "Yes," Meghan replied quickly. "You retained your title," Meghan continued. Meghan shifted slightly. "That title," Meghan added, "is how you signed multi-million-dollar media deals." Meghan's lips pressed together. "You've built a brand around your story," Meghan said evenly. "So at what point does storytelling become strategy?" The silence that followed was heavy, almost oppressive. Meghan inhaled deeply. "I won't apologize for surviving," she said. and I won't apologize for using my voice to empower others." Meghan's tone softened, but only slightly. "Empowerment is powerful," she said. "But it becomes complicated when it centers one person endlessly." Meghan scoffed. "So now I'm self-centered." "I didn't say that," Meghan replied. "I said centered." Meghan leaned back abruptly, shaking her head. "This is exactly what I mean. Women are allowed to speak, but only in ways that make others comfortable." Meghan met her gaze. "Or accountable." Meghan's voice rose a notch. "You keep saying that word accountability as if I owe something to people who have never lived my life," Meghan responded calmly. "Public trust comes with public platforms." Meghan smiled again, but this time irritation bled through the polish. "And who appointed you the arbiter of that trust?" Meghan's reply was immediate. "The same audience you continue to address." Meghan's fingers curled tightly around the arm of her chair. "Let's be honest," she said. "This feels less like journalism and more like punishment." Meghan tilted her head. "For what? For daring to step outside a system that was designed to break me?" Meghan snapped. Meghan's voice remained measured. "Or for refusing to let go of it while claiming you did?" That landed hard. Meghan blinked once, twice. "I gave up everything," she said, her voice tight. "Status, security, family." Meghan didn't interrupt, and yet Meghan continued. "I'm still expected to justify that choice to people who will never be satisfied." Meghan leaned forward slightly. "And why keep explaining it?" Meghan froze. The question hung in the air like a blade. "You could move on," Meghan said gently. "Many people do." Meghan's jaw clenched. "Moving on doesn't mean erasing the past." "No," Meghan agreed. "But reliving it endlessly keeps it alive." Meghan's voice sharpened. "So now I'm exploiting my own trauma?" Meghan looked directly at her. "I'm asking whether it's healing or branding." That was the first real crack. Meghan's composure wavered for a fraction of a second. She looked away, then back again, her smile gone entirely. "You're very comfortable questioning my motives," she said coldly. "But have you ever questioned your own?" Meghan raised an eyebrow.
All the time.
The red lights continued to glow. No applause, no laughter, no rescue. Just two women, locked in a battle neither could fully win. Because the moment the question started, control was already slipping. "Then ask yourself this," Meghan snapped, her voice suddenly sharper, cutting cleanly through the controlled calm of the room. "Why are you so invested in tearing me down?" She didn't shout. She didn't need to. The words landed with force precisely, because of how measured they were, edged with something raw beneath the surface. For a moment, the air between them seemed to tighten. "I'm not tearing you down," the interviewer replied evenly. Her tone was steady, almost clinical. "I'm asking what happens when a narrative stops evolving." Meghan leaned forward sharply, the movement abrupt enough to draw the eye of everyone watching. "You don't get to decide when my story is finished." "No," the interviewer said, unflinching, "but audiences do decide when they've heard it before." That was the moment the tension became unmistakable. What had once felt like a structured conversation now carried the unmistakable charge of confrontation. Meghan's hands began to move as she spoke, faster, sharper, less controlled. Each gesture punctuated her words like a warning. "It's obsession. With audience fatigue is just another way to silence women," she said, shaking her head as if dismissing a tired argument she'd heard too many times. The interviewer mirrored the calm. "No, it's a reflection of repetition." Voice rose, just enough to register. "So what would satisfy you? Silence? Disappearance?" The question hung there, heavy and accusatory. The interviewer didn't hesitate. "Perspective." Meghan laughed. Short and bitter, the sound edged with disbelief rather than humor. Easy to demand from someone who's never lived under global scrutiny. Her eyes flashed as she leaned back, crossing her arms for a brief second before releasing them again. The interviewer didn't retreat. Scrutiny isn't persecution. It did it. Meghan sat upright, her eyes blazing now, posture rigid. "You have no idea what persecution feels like." The interviewer held her gaze without blinking. Neither do people who truly experience it and don't monetize it. The room felt electric. Meghan's breath quickened, visible now, the rise and fall of her chest betraying the effort it took to stay composed. The microphones picked up every shift in tone, every pause, every breath that came a fraction too fast. "You're crossing a line," Meghan said tightly. The interviewer didn't back down, only because you drew it. For the first time, Meghan didn't immediately respond. The silence stretched, thick and uncomfortable, louder than any argument that had come before. The cameras kept rolling. The microphones captured everything, the tension, the restraint, the shift from performance to something far more personal. Somewhere off camera, a producer glanced at the clock. What had begun as a controlled interview was now something else entirely. The question was no longer if Meghan would explode, but when. The air conditioning hummed softly as if trying to pretend nothing was happening. The lights stayed warm, the camera angles unchanged, but the set had transformed, not physically, emotionally. The mood had turned heavy, expectant. Meghan had stopped smiling altogether. She leaned forward now, shoulders tight, eyes fixed on the interviewer with an intensity that suggested this was no longer a conversation. It was a test and one she refused to fail. The interviewer glanced down at her notes, deliberately unhurried. "Before we continue," she said calmly, "I want to clarify something." Meghan didn't blink. "Go on." Your voice stayed neutral, almost gentle. "You've said repeatedly that you left the institution for peace, for privacy, for safety." Meghan nodded once. "Correct." And yet the interviewer continued, "Your public presence since leaving has been constant. More content than most working entertainers." Meghan's jaw tightened. The muscle flickered once, twice. The implication was clear, and it landed exactly where it was meant to. Hey, this wasn't a question about intent. It was a question about contradiction. She opened her mouth to respond, then paused just long enough for the audience to feel the weight of what was being asked. The silence returned, but this time it wasn't stunned. It was deliberate, because beneath the headlines, beneath the talking points, beneath the carefully crafted narratives, something more uncomfortable had been exposed. Not anger, not victimhood. The uneasy space where control meets contradiction. And for the first time that night, it wasn't clear who was steering the story anymore. "So, we're back to this. We're back to consistency," Meghan replied, her patience visibly thinning. She let out a sharp exhale, the kind meant to release irritation, but instead, exposing it. "You're acting like speaking is a crime." "No," the interviewer said calmly. "I'm asking why the message stays the same." Meghan leaned back slightly, her posture stiffening as her tone turned icy. "Because the truth doesn't change just because you're bored." The interviewer's eyebrows lifted just enough to signal disbelief. "So you believe criticism exists because people are bored?" Meghan's lips curled into something close to a smirk. "I think people like you built careers on turning real pain into entertainment." Her face remained composed, but her eyes sharpened, narrowing with intent. "People like me?" she repeated evenly. "Yes," the interviewer replied, without hesitation. "Professional. Outrage merchants." The room went very still. Off camera, someone seemed to mouth careful. Even the hum of the studio equipment felt louder in the sudden pause. Meghan didn't lash out. She didn't raise her voice. She simply asked, "Is that how you handle pushback?" "Label it. Dismiss it. Move on." The interviewer leaned forward now, mirroring her guest's intensity. "No, I set boundaries." Meghan nodded once. "Then let's test that. If this is boundaries, what happens when someone asks a question you don't like?" Meghan's voice snapped. "You're not asking questions, you're suggesting motives." The interviewer didn't deny it. "Motives matter when your story is a product." Meghan's hands moved slightly, still controlled, but the control was thinning. "You keep calling it a product," she said tightly. "But what about your product, your show, your platform, and your audience? Your sponsors? You profit too." The interviewer smiled faintly. "I don't sell myself as a victim." Meghan's eyes flashed. "Oh, so we're doing moral superiority now?" The response was immediate, calm. "We're doing clarity." Megyn laughed, sharp and humorless. "Clarity, right?" Then she leaned in, speaking slower, deliberately, as if she wanted each syllable to sting. "You're angry because I didn't break." The interviewer's eyes never left her. "No, I'm skeptical because you keep insisting you did, while also insisting you didn't." A beat passed. Megyn stared. "Explain that. You say you were shattered by the institution," the interviewer said, "that you were hunted, that you were nearly destroyed." Megyn's face hardened, and then the interviewer continued. "You present yourself as the most resilient, most enlightened voice in every room." Megyn's voice rose. "Because I survived, or because survival became your brand?" That line didn't explode the room. It froze it. Megyn's mouth opened as if the response was already loaded, ready to fire, but nothing came out. Her eyes dropped briefly to the table, then lifted again. "You're disgusting," she said quietly. The interviewer didn't flinch. "That's not an answer." Megyn's voice climbed now, emotion breaking through restraint. "You're disgusting because you're doing exactly what the tabloids did, just with better lighting." The interviewer tilted, her head slightly. "The tabloids made claims. I'm asking about contradictions." Megyn shook her head in disbelief. "Think you're so righteous?" "No," the interviewer replied evenly. "I think words matter, especially when they shape public opinion." Megyn leaned forward. "Then here's a word for you. Obsessed." The interviewer's eyes narrowed slightly. "That's another label." Megyn continued, louder now. "You were obsessed with me, with Harry, with everything we represent. You don't care about truth, you care about relevance." The interviewer's lips pressed together briefly. "So now you're questioning my motives?" "At least I'm honest about it," Megyn snapped. The reply came quietly. "Are you?" That single question hit like a switch flipping. Megyn's posture shifted. Her composure didn't just crack, it fractured. She pointed slightly, not wildly, but enough for the cameras to catch the accusation. "You people," she said sharply. "You sit behind microphones and pretend you're brave. But you've never had to walk into a room knowing the world wants you to fail." The interviewer answered calmly. "Most people do, just don't get paid for it." Megyn's eyes widened. "There it is, jealousy." The interviewer's expression stayed flat. "Yeah, I don't envy scrutiny." Megyn leaned in like a blade. "You envy influence. If influence is built on repetition," the interviewer replied, "it's not influence, it's noise." Megyn's voice rose again. "You're trying to silence me?" "No," the interviewer said steadily. "I'm asking you to answer." "I am." "Answering," Megyn snapped. The interviewer didn't move. "No, you're performing." Megyn's head jerked back slightly. "Performing?" She nodded. "You're giving the version of yourself that wins headlines, not the one that wins trust." Megyn's hands tightened into fists in her lap, barely noticeable. But the camera caught it. The interviewer glanced down at the papers in front of her. "Let's talk specifics." Megyn's eyes narrowed. "About what?" "About statements that changed over time." Her face stiffened. "I'm going to read 2 lines." The interviewer said, "You tell me which one you stand by." "I'm not here for a courtroom game," Megyn snapped. "Then don't treat it like one," the interviewer replied calmly. "Just answer." Megyn's breath quickened. Off camera, a producer murmured something low, a warning, reminder to keep it controlled, but it was already far beyond control. The interviewer lifted the paper slightly. Megyn stared at it like it was a trap. "Are you ready?" the interviewer asked quietly. Megyn's smile returned, thin, sharp, hostile. "Go ahead," she said. "Try me." The interviewer didn't blink. And the way she held that page steady, patient, precise made it clear that the next 30 seconds would decide everything, because once those lines were read out loud, there would be no polite way back. For a moment, no one spoke. The paper didn't move, the camera didn't cut away, and Meghan Markle, who had controlled rooms far louder than this, felt something she hadn't expected at all. Not anger, not outrage, but the sudden loss of certainty about who was still in control.